I'm Dene Low, and it said Dene Low, okay? And I'm the moderator, and I was just so excited to get asked to do Anne McCaffrey because she had a huge influence on me growing up, and so I have a lot of questions to ask, but if you guys have questions, that would be good too. So I want to have us introduce ourselves. We'll start with Karen, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Karen Evans. My husband and I write for the Granville Gazette on the Bain.com 1632, and we have several short stories on that, and we are writing novels. We just need to get to publishing novels. That's another step. I also have a table as a vendor's room where I'm selling dragon scale fingerless gloves, which is what I'm working on. So, and I started reading Anne McCaffrey really, like you saying, really young, and we're old enough that was a long time ago before most of you were born. So I'm excited about this. She was one of my favorite writers.
Yeah, Anne McCaffrey was one of my favorite writers. She's one that kind of started me thinking I could possibly write science fiction and fantasy as a woman. I'm the moderator, Dene Low, and her writing has influenced what I write, which is why I started writing science fiction and fantasy myself. We'll find out more about me later, but yeah, Jessica.
I'm Jessica DeGeorge. I'm the New York Times bestselling author of, I really need to stop and think, so it's like more than 13. More than 13 books, all of them fantasy, most of them for young adults or middle grade readers, and in our small town library in the kids section, back when it was adults on this side of the room and kids on the other, and that was the only definition. The only book that I ever found that was science fiction was Dragon Song, and if you had said to me at that time or now, you too could have a tiny pet dragon in your pocket, I would be so there. So it was like everything you could possibly ever want, ever. And then when I got my own copy and she had red hair on the cover, I was just like, yes, this is
Okay, well, I apologize that my cell phone is going off, but I don't apologize too much. One of the messages coming in is from a certain Gigi McCaffrey. I'm Todd McCaffrey. You might have guessed I'm related to Anne McCaffrey just a little bit. She was one of my favorite people too. Was my mother.
That's good.
Yeah, and yeah, well, she was the one who did the long stories, believe us I. So the person I've been doing some texting with is going to be the soon, and I'm very proud to announce, well, it's kind of old news, but those of you who want more Pern are going to be getting more Pern in October when Gigi finishes when Gigi's first Pern novel, Dragon's Code, comes out in October.
Dragon's Coat.
Dragon's Code.
Code, okay.
C-O-D-E.
For a second I thought there was going to be fashion and dragons. I'm still excited. I'm still excited.
Not a Pern book.
You have to understand, my first book was called Dragon Slippers because I wanted to
I like dragon slippers. I mean, dragon scales. I think you can drag it everywhere.
Yeah.
You can really dragonize it. You would like to say something like that.
I don't know if I do want to say anything. I'm Maxwell Alexander Drake. I'm an award-winning novelist. I was a lead fiction writer for a massive game from Sony called EverQuest Next. Last couple of years I've been making my living in the movie industry. I'm actually in the throes of I had a pilot greenlit on a TV series that I wrote, so that's taken up a lot of my time. Well, the series hasn't sold. We just got paid to do the pilot that no one may ever see. Yeah. So it's not that great. I didn't bring any fiction with me. I did bring some nonfiction. So if you guys are interested in asking about that, you can talk to me later. And I have a dirty secret that I'm going to share. I definitely know the name Anne McCaffrey. I definitely, as an industry person, I know her impact on the industry, and I'm very aware of that. I even own 5 books from her in my library because I just looked at them yesterday. But I've actually never read Anne McCaffrey. So I didn't take a look at the panels until like 2 days ago, and I didn't realize that because I probably would have tried to bow out of this one, but since it was just 2 days ago, I do know her impact on the industry. You know,
So why do you have those books?
Because I was going to read them. I mean, I bought the first 3 Pern
Because
books when I was probably 16 or 17. That's how old they are. They're just sitting there. I have a huge library.
First of all, I'm glad to know I'm not the only person who has bought books.
Oh,
I'm gonna go out and say more than 10 years old in your case, and definitely in mine. I'm really super glad I'm not the only person.
Yeah, I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of novels, you know, all in hardback that I have never even been opened. Because I just go to bookstores and I'm like, oh, that's.
Do you remember what titles you have of Anne McCaffrey?
So I got the
the
first 3 Dragons of Pern, and then I've got 2 others that are book 1s of 2 other series, and I don't even remember picking them up. They've just been there for so long. But like I said,
do you have the Rowan? Get the Rowan.
I don't know.
Read the Rowan.
All right.
I was in a long Twitter convo the other day. Of course, maybe it's more of a lady book or something like that, but I know so many women writers that the Rowan and Damia were absolutely like so formative to their teenage years and stuff.
Oh.
Yeah. Plus those covers again, a fashion icon of those outfits were just to die for.
Well, I do think I can give some input on her impact from an industry perspective, even though I haven't read the novels. So that's what I'm hoping to add to the conversation. Or I'll just sit here and smile.
Just sit there with pretty.
Well, that brings up a question I want to ask you then.
Sure, pick on.
Have you ever heard anybody say in the industry that Anne McCaffrey has an influence?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Anne McCaffrey's name comes up all the time. I mean, her, Ursula Gwynn, many others, which Ursula Gwynn I've read extensively, but and this is going to sound a little crude, this is just my way of putting it, they were some of the first ones to really break the mold of writing female lead characters as basically dudes without penises. And so, like, they were instrumental in shaping...
Or not hiding as dudes, which is absolutely my most hated trope.
Yeah, the
in
whole
history
Shakespeare
ever.
dress up as a boy.
Right,
Yeah.
so I mean, I understand her importance over the last 50 years. There's just a lot of books to read. And I read a lot. I just can't read them all.
You're not trying hard enough.
I deserve that.
So it sounds like everybody here has, except
Drake.
Matt.
Drake.
Drake, you want to call him Drake? Okay. Except Drake has,
Which means dragon.
yes,
So
I
he's
know.
going for that cool factor.
Yes. Anyway, has read McCaffrey. And how has this changed her writing? How has it changed your view of science fiction fantasy? Or has it just been...
Well, I'm going to have to speak up here on behalf of Anne McCaffrey. Because Anne McCaffrey will pound the table and sternly remind you that she never wrote fantasy.
Right.
No,
Ever.
there's
Right,
It's
science
all
fiction.
science fiction, even though everybody who skipped the introduction to Dragonflight thinks that Dragonflight is all fantasy.
Right.
And I don't care, frankly. I mean, I love my mother and I love the fact that she wrote science fiction, but if you bought the book and you liked it, I'm happy. No, it's science fiction.
I also think it had to do with that time period, the fantasy in the 60s and 70s.
Science fiction had a lot more cachet.
Right.
Yeah.
Fantasy was considered negative back then in the 60s.
Well, yeah,
and
in
70s.
the
Or for
60s,
children.
in the 70s,
yeah.
if you were writing science fiction, you were probably a man, and if you were writing fantasy, you were probably a woman. And
Andre
that's-
Norton would be...
Yeah, I understand that, but, you know, she had one of those names that could be either way.
That wasn't
People
her
are
real
arguing
name.
now.
Right.
What didn't she use the
Yeah,
name
actually, when I was a
Andre?
teenager, I
So
thought
it
that
was.
Exactly. Exactly. So
And that's something
I
I was
remember
gonna say.
that.
I always admired the fact because so many, if you look back at what was kind of around at the time in the same section, if your library was lucky enough to have genres, go Idaho. But you had a lot of people that I did not realize until like very recently were women because they did the, and just like with J.K. Rowling, which happened in this century practically, they told them
It won't sell.
dudes won't, you won't sell sell, dudes won't read it. And so you had a lot of people, oh my gosh, brain went dead. Tea with the Black Dragon.
Bertie McAvoy.
Bertie, yeah, Bertie, Roberta, R.A. McAvoy. I met her and went, you're not a man. One of my finer moments. But you had a lot. Andre Norton, I was pretty sure was a woman. All her books are about women. And that's a slightly androgynous name. But especially in Idaho where anything could be a name. But
Yes.
but you had a lot of women writing under, and so seeing Anne with an E, as you know, Anne of Green Gables and stuff, writing books that were science fiction that had spaceships on the cover and stuff, that was hugely exciting for so many women who wanted to be writers, so many girls. It's like you don't have to pretend to be a dude in the book or outside of the book to do this.
Right. And for me, I started reading science fiction in 5th grade because the librarian said, you're a girl, you like horse books. This is why I've never read a horse book. So,
I always got babysitting.
oh, no.
Babysitting books.
Oh, you're a girl, you'd like a horse book. What? I had finished the 800 series of all the fairy tales and horror stories and was looking for something new, and she wants to give me a horse book. And I had read Little House on the Prairie and all the historical fictions, and I wanted something new that was not a horse book because I'm not going to read it. And so I found Heinlein's Juveniles, and I read Citizen of the Galaxy. And that's where I started with science fiction. And I read more. I read Andre Norton, and it began to be a little more clear to me in 5th and 6th grade. This is in the 60s when I was in 5th and 6th grade. It became more clear to me that yes, girls can do this too. And it was still the age where, you know, all astronauts are men and all jet pilots are men and, you know, all of that kind of thing. But with the baby boomers, we knew for certain in our heart that when I get older, I can do that too. And so it was a new age of those things opening up, and that's when I found Anne McCaffrey. And her, you know, in Lessa is the main character, and she doesn't depend on anybody, and she can talk to dragons. How bad can that be? You know, it was like an affirmation for me that yes, girls can do things too.
So Anne McCaffrey's been said to be a trendsetter.
Mm-hmm.
So would that be like one of the trends that she set? What are some of the other things that she's done to literature and science fiction and fantasy? And I add fantasy because as a kid I had thought it was fantasy.
You're forgiven.
I was going to say too, on that note, isn't it interesting how it's changed? Because science fiction, I used to just use science fiction as a catch-all, and I might be talking about Terry Brooks, you know, and I might have been talking about The Ship Who Sang. But I'd say like, oh, I like to read science fiction. I always told people I like science fiction. And then, and let's all blame Peter Jackson for this. I really think that when Lord of the Rings became very mainstream, that's when people started saying fantasy, and now people are using fantasy as the catch-all.
Right. We
in this room have ever said, you know, SF and F or science fiction and fantasy probably. People tend to use one or the other, so I just think it's interesting how that has flipped, because back in the day,
right,
science fiction, because there was science, you know, and fantasy and talking dragons was a little weird, and now it's kind of flipped around. It's like, oh, like science fiction, like, you know, there's no gravity in space. It's like, yeah, thanks, man, I didn't. So that's interesting. That's my tangent.
Okay, good tangent.
Go,
Jessica. Okay. So we talked about the fact that Anne McCaffrey was so innovative because she wrote as a woman from a woman's viewpoint. Who might have inspired her to do that? I've been trying to think about that myself.
Do you know?
And
yes, tell us, Todd.
Well, some of it was herself, but some of it was, I mean, there were other writers out there. There was, I want to say Joanna Ross, I've got another name that I'm missing, Judy Merrill, Andre Norton, of course. You know.
Madeline L'Engle was writing science fiction.
Madeline L'Engle will fight you if you call her book science fiction.
Yeah, but she has tesseracts in it, so.
That's science.
Yes.
That's science.
that's not fiction.
Also, they're very, very Christian. And so she was writing more from that angle, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, so that was some of it. Some of it was her upbringing, but she was also, she'd read enough science fiction that she decided that she really wanted to write the counterpoint. I mean, she'd read so many stories where the aliens are coming in and the guys fighting them and the girls in the back screaming up on the seat like she was afraid of mice or something. And she decided that no, if there were aliens coming in the house, I'd be getting my frying pan and doing something. And you get that in particular with the first thing that got published to hers as a novel, which was Restoration. Which is a pure space romance, but it's where our heroine is like, nope. And that was sort of her thing. In many respects, her heroines were always out there doing it and moving forward. And weren't taking any guff.
So we see this, the first time I read one of her books was in 1967. So I'm really old. And, but Andre Norton was writing in 1947. That's a 20-year difference.
I was going to ask about that because I was like, I thought they were kind of together, but then I discovered them at the same time.
Oh, Andre Norton is responsible for The White Dragon.
Oh, is she?
Yes. Andre came up to Mom at one point and she said, because she'd read Dragonflight and Dragon Quest and she loved them, she said, Anne, you should have a sport, a dragon sport, and it should be white. And that's where the idea for the White Dragon comes from.
That's cool.
It's kind of, the general rule is, by the way, everybody, remember this one, when the New York Times best-selling author gives you a suggestion, take it. Just so you know.
You just gave me way too much power.
But it's true, too.
Well, Jessica, you read so much that I think that anything you're going to tell me is going to be useful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm honestly, on Facebook and everything, you've got all these books, and how do you read 3 books a day? I don't know.
I am under doctor's orders to do 1 hour of cardio every day because otherwise my circulation and liver and spleen don't function. And so, yeah, I know, it's all that hard drinking down at BYU.
I've heard about that.
So I have chosen the recumbent bike as my weapon of choice because from the waist up I can hold the book very nicely steady. And so if you follow me on Instagram, you will notice that there is a lovely Cybex recumbent bike screen background for all my book shots.
Right, and you use that screen to lean the book on.
Yeah, it's got the pullers. It's got, so yeah.
That's good. So now we've established that Andre Norton was like 20 years before Anne McCaffrey. Do you guys see any difference between the way Andre Norton attacks science fiction and Anne McCaffrey does? Do you see any difference?
I stopped reading Andre Norton because I didn't want to read about anyone else's periods. I had enough with my own, thank you. So, I really didn't care about anyone else's cramps because I was suffering on my own.
Don't need any.
But and I love Andre Norton, and I love many of her books, and my librarian asked me to please just buy my own copy of 4 from the Witch World instead of just rechecking that one out all the time. But I did really appreciate the fact that in the children present, the intimate relationships in Anne's books seem to be more, the women were in control, this is what they wanted, they were a lot more consensual, and in Andre Norton's books there was a lot more skeezy behavior, or women are powerless if they're in a relationship, or things like that, and I did not care for that. That was kind of my big difference. I saw a lot more sexual liberation in Anne McCaffrey's books than I did in Andre Norton's, which is a startling revelation from someone who is writing very frankly about women's issues and stuff like that. But I felt that the relationships were a lot more one-sided or seen as like a danger. Like the Witch World books, if you know the premise of the Witch World books, like ladies had to be like virgin priestesses essentially to have any power whatsoever. And I did not care for that.
But so to ask a follow-up question to that,
yes.
like, again, it was 20 years prior to that.
Yes, so now knowing that.
Industry
Oh, knowing
You know,
that,
she
yeah.
fit into what was allowed.
What they
and
would
I
buy.
hate using that word allowed.
But knowing that was 20 years earlier, I really questioned that she fit into that because I can't talk about some of those things in my books today, you know what I mean? But, so it's very interesting.
It is that she got those
So,
through
that
because
she got that through, which now I
But she was
appreciate
still
more.
limited by
But on a personal,
the time scale that
as
she
a
was
person,
publishing.
she was.
I didn't want to read about
And,
that
and
anymore.
what publisher would buy what she had?
Right.
You know, and there were publishers that said, well, there's not enough this in it, put more sex in it, or put more,
Right.
you know, language in it, or whatever.
Well,
Now
that
they're
broke
saying,
down,
take more
you know, that's-
language out, but it's,
That started the trend of breaking down those barriers, and then I
Yes.
think
Yeah.
Anne, you know, and several others that we've already mentioned continue to break that down and pave the way for a much better, in my opinion. industry.
egalitarian.
Yeah.
It's more egalitarian now than it ever has
Yeah.
been. You know, you can put your maiden name on a book and no one flinches. No one says, oh, you know, that's a girl name. You can't have that on the book.
Yeah.
Well, Lois McMaster-Bujold, for
Yeah,
example.
and Lois sells a lot of books.
Lois writes some darn good books.
She-
Well, we're also in an industry now where 75% of all book buyers in the United States are female. So the buying market has changed dramatically.
Yeah.
So the writing market has had to change.
I know so many women that, like, as kids, their dad was the one reading, especially science fiction, and they were sneaking dad's books because
Yeah.
they weren't for girls.
Right.
So they were sneaking dad's books, but now, you know, and now it's like, haha, now I'm writing those kind of books and stuff. But it really was like, yeah, my mom had, you know, maybe mom had some Danielle Steele or something, but dad had the science fiction. They were for men. And so to see women authors or women in control of those books is amazing.
Well, I also think that has to do with the time as well, because, you know, growing up, we didn't have, because I'm not quite as old, but I'm still getting up there, but we didn't have video games or anything like that. And dudes today will not read books. They would much rather, for the most part, I mean, obviously there's guys that read. I'm not saying I'm one of them. But for the most part, a male 20, 30-ish will look for a video game or a TV show or a movie way over picking up a book and reading it, which is why the industry has become very female dominant in the book box.
Okay, that's like a separate conference. Don't even start there.
I don't want to go there. I'm just saying that our market has changed is my point.
Well, yes.
And I think these women were trendsetters that helped break down those barriers and push us into the industry that we are today, is my point I'm trying to make.
So,
That's a good point.
so do you think McCaffrey had any kind of influence over the reason why that changed?
Well, she wrote a darn good book.
She wrote a darn
She wrote
good,
a lot of
yeah,
books.
a lot of good books that
Yeah,
were
that's-
inviting people
And
to.
publishers like that.
Oh, yeah, they kind of like rock.
Yeah, they like having, you know, a name that the reader will recognize and come and buy again and again and again. And publishers really like that because then they sell books, right?
Well, talk about selling books. One of the things that kind of changed from 1967 when she first published her book to today is how prevalent young adult novels have become. So, and a lot of her works are considered young adult.
Yeah, of course she didn't.
Why would they be considered young adult?
Teenage protagonists.
Exactly.
I don't know about that.
I
mean,
mostly
for
see
one-
the
for
Harper
one,
Hall.
there's only 3 books in the
Yeah,
whole series.
that's really
That's not a whole bunch of YA.
It's a gateway drug.
Leslie was a teenager when the book started.
No, she's about 21.
Was she 21?
Yeah.
I always thought of her as a little younger, but I was younger when I was reading
Yeah,
it, so.
yeah, I mean, but if you look at me, and this is something I've had to play with a lot.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like, how old is Lessa? How old is, yeah. But, no, she didn't really write much YA. She wrote stuff that could be read by youngsters. A lot of the, I mean, if you read Dragonflight before you were a teenager and you reread it now, your eyes will, there'll be certain scenes that you'll go, oh.
My sister tattled on me about those books, mine I had. She was getting carded for something else, and so she turned on me and yelled, "You should read about the mating flights in those dragon books Jessica reads." And I'm like, no!
Well, I also think that comes down to the industry changing as well, because 20 years ago, YA had a much narrower definition, and today it's stupid. I don't even understand.
I was
it's
a
now like
bookseller.
12
I was
to
a bookseller
28.
for many years, and I ran the children's department at Borders for the last couple of years. Remember Borders? Till they kill it. Oh, we watched it happen. I jumped ship because I saw it coming.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, it was bad. But anyway, I basically started working at Borders with the first Harry Potter book. And I watched my entire room morph and change because there was children's books. We had one small shelf that was basically the required reading shelf for teens that had The Outsiders on it, My Darling, My Hamburger, a couple of those Lurleen McDaniel Too Young to Die books, and then like a copy of The Hobbit with an odd Peter Sis cover that was very pink. And that was the teen section. That was the teen section. That was like it. And kids would come in and go, I have to read. And I'd be like, Outsiders or Darling My Hamburger? You know, those were your choices. And then you had children's books. And the children's books were very much younger. We're talking, you know, our Narnias and our Cam Jansons and all those things. Trixie Belden solves another mystery. And those things were children's books. And then Harry Potter blew it open for new children's books, and then those readers started to age up, and then you got Twilight, and love it or hate it, but when Twilight hit it big, the Barnes & Noble young adult section went from being one shelf to being a separate department. Because not only were teens using their babysitting money to not buy babysitter books, but buy sexy vampire books, but their moms were coming in for the same books, and once they got done with those, because it's not a long read, when they got done with those, they went for something else like that, and that was the boom. And so a lot of stuff that was published back in the day, and I don't think, I mean, I read them as teens, but I would not give my teen anything but the Harper Hall trilogy, really, because like I say, they were very sexually liberated and stuff like that. But a lot of stuff is now marketed to teens and even younger readers that was not before. Ender's Game is now marketed as a teen book. I think you can find it in teen and adult. They've got different covers and stuff like that. The Harper Hall trilogy I almost entirely see in the teen section. A lot of stuff. People went around and went, wait, the protagonist is a teenager, and teens are always looking for a book, so this must be for teenagers. But you could write to that back in the day. In the 60s, you couldn't say, I'm writing this book entirely for teenagers. People would be like, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
Like,
there was no bookshelf for that.
When I started trying to get published, because I was going to adult publishers, because when I started trying to get published, teen books were not a thing unless they were about teen pregnancy or getting cancer at 14. You know, that was not a thing. And I would send them to places like Tor and stuff, and they would go like, this is so great, but could you make her 10 years older, because otherwise we can't publish this. There's no market, and we don't support this. I wouldn't know how to edit it. So, I mean, they were writing to the time, so it's kind of interesting to look back now and see the things that we all read as teens in secret. That as parents we would not allow now. And then it's also interesting to see the stuff that's been repackaged for teens, because it was for teens, but there wasn't a field for that.
Okay, question.
Todd, I was wondering if we could hear more about what your introduction to your mother's writing was like.
Like, how old were you when you first read one of her books? That always fascinates me.
Actually, you have the book. You just signed it. If you read Dragonbolt, you know the answer.
That's the first book of hers you read?
I wrote Dragonbolt.
I know.
But, okay.
That's why I had you send it.
Yes. You haven't read it yet.
But I said, how old were you when you read it? Oh, but it's in there.
Yes.
Okay, it's been a few years since I
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. So I started reading science fiction early on, and when I was 9, I managed to find Space Cat by Ruth and Todd. And Space Cat had a picture of the standard Chelsea Bonestell 3-fin spaceship on the moon, and there was a guy on the moon, and there was a cat in a nice big bubble helmet on the moon. And at that same time...
That book is still around with that cover.
Yeah, it's not very good, unfortunately. But it's children, you know, we don't have much taste. So at the same time, Mom's The Ship Who Sang was published in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. It was FNSF by everybody. And the cover of FNSF, because she did not get the cover story, was a banana floating in a starfield. So I have to ask you, as a 9-year-old, you have a cat on the moon with a spaceship and a bubble helmet. or a banana floating against the background of stars. Which are you going to be interested in? It was not a choice. Now later on, of course, I read The Ship Was Sang and I loved it. And also discovered that that was the same edition that had Daniel Keyes's Flowers for Algernon in it. So it was an amazing freaking issue. But at the time, I was 9. But yes, I discovered science fiction long before I found out that Mom was writing it. Her first attempt to introduce it to me was a miserable fail. Then she embarrassed the heck out of me. Was it her second? Might have been her third. But she wrote a book about a young child growing up in an overpopulated world that gets a chance to move to a new planet and help colonize it and all. And of course, she modeled it on, she says, 6-year-old me. Now, I happen to know 6-year-old me pretty darn well. I don't agree. But I was a teenager at the time. You know, I was a brand new teenager. I was going into 7th grade, so I was all of 13.
So you had never been a 6-year-old that you recall. So
Well, no, I knew the 6-year-old. But, no, it's worse than that. Okay, so you're a 13-year-old male teen, you know. Embarrassment is your middle name. My mother was going to have this book that was going to be on the bookshelves of the little local convenience store right next to my junior high school. And she was going to have a dedication to me. It was going to be, "To my darling son, Todd." And I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to die. So we had a long argument. And so Decision in Dune is now dedicated to Todd Johnson, of course. Which were so much better because nobody knew who the heck that was. But yeah, no, I mean, parents, be warned, you know, how to embarrass your children for the rest of their lives. Just do that. So that was my introduction. And I think
I only put our pets in my books for that reason.
it's probably a good idea. Probably a good idea. Although you should, you know, every now and then, it's kind of like, if you don't behave, I'll put you in a book. It's a great way, you know.
No one would believe that that was real. They're like, talking dragon's fine. Your baby doing that? No.
Oh yeah, no, my baby's too old. But that's kind of where it went. And then,
Did you know what your mom's job was until you read her books? Like, did you understand what her job was?
she would, see, now you're looking at a range of time. You know, Mom wanted to be an opera singer first.
I did not.
So this is one of the reasons why Kilishandra and Crystal Singer works so well, is that
knew.
burr in the voice,
Yeah.
she had it. So she was going to be an opera singer, and that was the whole thing, and that's what she wanted to do. And we went to Germany for 6 months when I was 6, 62, and she actually worked with somebody who ruined her voice, very much like Crystal
nice.
Singer. That, you know, writing sort of came sideways. I'm trying to remember now what started her on it. It was sort of along the lines of the famous, this is how you write everything. I can do better than that, or I want to explore this story. The Ship Was Sang was started because somebody had a slightly different story, and she wanted to do more with it. And also, The Ship Was Sang was sort of catharsis for the death of her father, which is one of the reasons why the story has so much power. Also, though, notice how old Helva is in The Ship Was Sang. Hands up, how many people know how old Helva is at the beginning of The Ship Was Sang?
She's a baby, but then she's
16.
Oh, is she 16?
She's 16 in the end of that story. It's one of those.
That's why I say, like, she does have,
But yeah, but we're not
Quite the
treating Helva as a YA. You know.
yeah, no.
No, that's a full-on adult sort of love story, but she was only 16. I was surprised. Anyway, so yeah, I started reading her early, and then I got to the point where I was able to read The White Dragon as it came out of the electric typewriter in Ireland, which was page by page by page, which was good. And I learned a very valuable lesson then. You know, every story has got to have a little lull in it to let us catch our breath and everything, and it doesn't have to be the best. And so she made the mistake of asking me what I thought. And I said, well, it's a bit slow right now, and I'm sure it'll pick up, but this part that you just got, it's still, she didn't write for 2 weeks after.
Oh, dear.
So don't ever tell anybody. As far as I'm concerned, I don't ever comment on an unfinished manuscript from now on. It's got to be, when it's done, we'll talk. But yeah, it was fun.
That's fun. So do you remember anything in particular about her writing process that you would tell?
Oh, yeah, well, back in 1960, I want to think it was 60, no, it had to be like 66, maybe early 67. I got thrown out of the front room because, which is terrible, because it's the only room where we had a record player, and I was listening to Tommy by the house, so maybe it was a little bit later. But, you know, I got thrown out of there because she needed to plot and work on things, and what did I think about dragons? And I said, dragons? He says, yes. I said, why dragons? He says, well, they've had bad press.
I have to agree with her.
Yeah, I've got to say, you know, if
They're always
one thing,
the bad
there's
guy.
one thing that Mom did is she gave dragons a good name again.
Yeah, after Tolkien. Tolkien really trashed on dragons.
Oh, Tolkien really trashed on dragons, but Tolkien picked it up from the
He did.
whole ring cycle and all that stuff.
Well, yeah, and George and the Dragon and British,
Northern Europeans just
Yeah.
really super hate dragons. It's
Well,
something
the
they
reason,
need to work
no,
on.
the reason they hate dragons is because dragons are creative. They're powerful and creative, and the church at the time.
And I was just going to say, they don't go to church.
The church at the time was very much against powerful, creative forces, and so the dragon embodied that. So you would have
yeah.
stories about the dragons being killed. It's sort of like, you know, do anything.
and it's in
without a
Revelations, right? It's in,
Yeah, it's all over the place. So, yeah.
Revelation says a lot of things.
yeah.
So, all right, now we're well far afield. So that was
Well,
good.
I was just going to say, we only have a few minutes left, so open it up for questions. Any questions that you'd like to ask, especially Todd? Nothing?
Wow, exhausted you.
We really covered everything.
Telepathy,
full.
dragons.
Question.
My first introduction to Dene McCaffrey was the Dinosaur Planet books.
Uh-huh.
What have you had any anecdotes about those?
There were a couple of times, as he got more and more famous in his career, where strange things would come along, and they would turn out to be unexpected. And the Dinosaur Planet books are an example of that. It was supposed to be one YA book and one very simple thing, and all of a sudden it turned into, oh, you're writing an adult book, and 5 minutes? Thank you. You're writing an adult book, and you need more, and there's going to be more, and it just is sort of like a contract. The contract said one thing, and what the publisher actually wanted was very different. It was not a lot of fun. So that's why it took so long to get the second book out, was because it was sort of like neck in the teeth, and you were being asked to do something you didn't really expect you're supposed to be doing. So that's what happened with us. They were fun. Yes?
So, talk about passing the torch, her passing it to you, you writing with your mom. What was that like, collaborating?
I just said it earlier, you know, the general rule is let the New York Times bestselling author win. The other rule that you all know is mom always wins. So it wasn't hard.
I'm your mother.
Although actually the story behind it all is kind of fun. I was working on, do you have the copy? Can I show it?
Yes.
Can you leave it around?
Yes.
Out of print now, but there's going to be another version. I was working on this, Dragon Holder, the life and times, so far, of Anne McCaffrey. And I'd been asked to work on that because otherwise Mom was going to write her autobiography and she wouldn't be writing more Pern books, and we thought that was a bad idea. So I was working on that, I was interviewing her and things, and we talked about collaborating. And, oh God, there's 2 stories behind that. Yeah, okay, so the first one is, I said, dude, you know, I'd love to write a story where for some reason we have a dragon and 2 riders. Like one dragon died saving the other dragon and the bond snapped. And so now we have 2 riders, 1 dragon. And this was after all the Wares of Pern, and Mom said, well, I'd like to write a story about an asteroid hitting Pern and what the reaction to that would be. And it's all well and good, and I'm busy working on Dragon Holder, I'm late on Dragon Holder, and I'm in LA. And I get a call in the middle of the night. I can't kill the dragon! I can't kill the dragon! And I said, well, dear, if you don't want to kill the dragon, don't kill the dragon. And that was the first I knew that my mother was writing the book we were going to collaborate on, all by herself.
So you're like, don't worry, I'll kill the dragon.
She wrote all by herself.
Oh.
We were supposed to collaborate. She just, poof, goes down with it. But later on, she had been given a contract for an anthology of Pern short stories. And she's called me and she said, I want you to write a Pern short story, and we should tell a story about Pimer before he came to Harper Hall. And I thought about it, and thought that was great, and I was thrilled and everything. And 24 hours later, I had this plot idea, and I sent it off to her, and she loved it. And then she emailed me back, and she said, "Oh, but I just discovered it has to be all Anne McCaffrey stories. I can't get you to write on it." I said, "Oh, that's sad." And then she wrote me back and said, "But it's kind of watch my mood, you know. Oh, you get to write a story on Pern. Cool. No, you can't write a story on Pern. Sad. Okay, now we go to the next phase. Email comes back saying, but I'd love to write this story based on your outline. Cool. Then the next day, no, I can't do it. It's not ethical." So it's like this. But at that point, I'd actually come up. How many people? Okay, you remember Dragonflight? Do you remember Dragon Quest? Do you remember the ancient rooms in Bend and Weir?
Yes.
Okay, well now the funny thing about Bend and Weir is it's the second Weir. It's not the first Weir, it was the second Weir founded. So why were there ancient rooms in Bendon and not Fort? What was the reason behind those ancient rooms that that Falessen and Jackson discovered? And I thought about that, and I thought that was really kind of an interesting question to answer, so I came up with an idea and a way to answer it in something that's called Dragon's Blood, which is my first solo Pern novel. And I had this pretty cool idea and all sorts of great characters, and I was chunkling along, and then I realized that it had this brilliant plot for something to do with Pimer, but it really wouldn't have worked because Pimer was 6 years old, and 6-year-olds are not really all that good at being independent agents. It's true. And so I thought about it a little bit more. My main character, Kindon, didn't have a backstory, and I realized that with just a little bit of effort, actually just replace the name Pimer with Kindon, and pretty much the entire story just worked. So that's where we came up with the collaboration that became Dragonskin. One thing, if your plots don't work, think about changing them, or just put them away for a while and maybe something
Change
else.
the names.
Well, in this case, it worked out nice, because
Yeah.
I don't really think that 6-year-old Pimer, there's still a question as to what happened with Pimer, but you couldn't have told the story that Dragonskin is. You had to have somebody a little bit older.
And so there's still a Pimer story that,
No, there's Pimer, the pre-Pimer story, the pre-Harper Hall Pimer story, I don't know.
it'll come up, yeah.
Maybe. There's a lot of other stories out there. So there's a story that I've been noodling on in the back of my brain. Mom also asked me, she said, well, you're big in military SF, and you like writing a lot of military SF. I wish you'd write the prequels to Dragonstar. What happened to Admiral Bendon and Emily Bowl before they became who they were. So it's one of the things on my list of things to look at, but it's very hard to write a story when you know where people are going to be at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
You're
You
kind
have
of
to
writing into
write
a
it
corner.
backwards.
Yeah, and it's sort of kind of like, well, but that takes away all the fun. Then I figured out exactly, because if you have a character, you've got to have this, anything can happen. So you have this great, Paul Bendon who became the hero of this, that, and the other, and we know he's going to survive because he's there in Dragon's Dawn, so he has to live and all. No, if you're going to write a story like that, obviously what you have to do is kill him. So, it's easy. Of course, Lois Bujold has already done that, so now we know how to kill characters and bring them back to life. It's easy.
Well, if you've ever watched soap operas, you've already know.
I have watched Power 2.
Or just the movie Soapdish. We
Yes.
decapitated him with an elevator. Put us back in the freezer.
Yeah. So we have like 1 minute left.
Okay.
Okay, so this is mainly for Jessica, but if anybody else wants to answer, cool. I'm just wondering, since you seem to have turned out like a fine, responsible adult, having read what you did as a teenager, why would you not let teenagers today read the same thing?
My teenagers. As a mom, I know what my kids are emotionally ready for. I was emotionally ready. I was not ready for some of the things I read, and I do wish I had read them older, and I have gone back and reread some things to actually understand what was going on. But my oldest, who's my only teenager so far, I have 3 kids, he's 13. He's not ready for some of these things. So that's the perspective I'm saying is I would not give him, I would totally give him the Harper Hall trilogy. He loves The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But I would not give him some of the things just because I think emotionally he's not ready for it.
Did you read the Freedom series? Freedom's Landing, Freedom's...
No, I actually did not.
Ah.
Would you like those?
I don't know. You have to
I will,
read.
I will read them first. So that's the thing is I say as a parent, and also the climate's very different. Like we were just talking about that in the last one about children's literature. Now that there is more to choose from that is more specific and that does deal with things that the kids are going through, it's important for them to read those things as well, because that's very formative for them. And, you know, I liked pulling one over on my mom, and I certainly hope my kids never try that with me. So that's the other thing. My kids are so good. They're not, except for the 6-year-old. They're crazy.
Wait. 13-year-old boy. Now, if it being a girl, she'd already been, you know, knee.
Oh yeah, no, my 9-year-old I'm very concerned about. My daughter is actually like some kind of certified genius or something like that. She's creepy. So we're loaded for bear with her.
Wednesday Addams, right?
She is Wednesday Addams. She is a strawberry blonde Wednesday Addams.
Awesome. It is not fun having a child smarter.
Time's up. Thank you very much.